Hello. All right. Make sure, since I got a really nasty comment that this is the 2000s and you shouldn't be staring and looking around as you make sure everything works. Hello. Wow, there's already a bunch of comments here. Hold on a second. I'm quite excited for this as I'm struggling a lot with this. I've watched every single video Melanie has produced and I'm reading Dramatica. All right, that's cool. Make sure the sound is here. All right, sounds good. I keep telling myself once I finish it, I'll click, and some parts have, but I'm still fighting this. Honestly, I'm not sure. I've studied pretty much every single structure on the entire planet. I understand that there's this chart, that the archetypes are built from this chart, that the four stories are created from this chart and ordered in any way, but I don't know much about these aspects of the chart. I think I'm still learning, but really it's about the order of it. It's not taught in a building way, maybe in a linear way, I'm not sure. It's about finding the best order to convey a specific argument from the four sides. All right, this is all right. All the theory materials I've read explain the model, but the practice is best explained in my courses. That's funny. This wasn't meant to be an ad for the cohort. I get this as a concept, yes. It's the details, but I haven't finished the book. I did not know Jim has a course. All right, well, now it is an ad for the course. um, so it's the same thing that I used to teach at CalArts when I taught there for 7 years. And it's called Mastering Dramatica. Since we're all together, I can use the name and it's totally fine. And I've been running it for about 3 or 4 years now online, ever since the pandemic, like during that time. And it's a 6-week class, and Tuesday, Thursdays, everything's recorded. We take your whole story from beginning to end and go over everything, and you can ask all kinds of questions. It does include a whole year of the platform on the plus version of it for free. And then I can give you all, I'll put all the details for it in the comment or the description for this class or for this episode, because I hadn't really planned on this being an ad for it, although that I guess that makes sense that that's what this is. But no, this was really just to show some cool things that you can do with Narrova, even outside of the class. But yeah, we're right in the middle of it. We're in the last 2 weeks. Um, with some people are repeats. Some people find after like the second or third time they finally get it, and really fun stuff because then I can go through and show you all the specific stuff, and you get questions answered. And then offline, if you have questions, I can help walk you through it and do all that stuff. So I will leave that. And thank you about saying I'm a great teacher because I do love teaching. I'll leave all the instructions for that after all this stuff. So, and there were some last minute changes I made to make this all work because it was working. But as with all things AI, everything changes every week, and then I have to make sure that it still does what it's supposed to. So, just to get, I guess, maybe like an overall feeling of what today's or this week's episode is about. And feel free to ask any questions as I'm going along because I have it all up here. So, I could definitely put that in there or answer any of the questions. But the idea is that you can read everything and you can, go through all the articles that I've written or Melanie's written, all that stuff, and that's great. But I have found the very best way to learn it is to either explore a story form through a particular film, and film's just the most accessible because it's usually less than 2 hours, or in the process of writing your own stuff. Now, the really nice thing about the whole AI stuff is not that it writes it for you or it does all the thinking for you, but it can help you get a hold of what all these concepts are in a way that meets you at your level instead of you trying to guess what stuff is and having to ask a million questions and hopefully somebody's there. The AI is just reflecting back to you kind of where you are, mixing it with all the stuff that we've done for the last 30 years. And then that way you can take advantage of all that. I can finish the book before class since, yeah. And Chris and Melanie will be the first ones to tell you that the book's kind of a difficult read to get through. It's very technical, and there is talk of rewriting it with all the new stuff. I almost did not do today's live stream because ever since I put the Storyform builder into the platform, it's really important that when you make all these choices, and I could just bring it up here so you have something to look at besides me. When if I flip to the platform here, yeah, you should see. Does that automatically switch over? Probably should, I would imagine. So, yeah, when it flips over, okay, great. So when you go to the platform here, right now we have the three modules here. One is Narrova, which is the super intelligence, everything that's connected to Dramatica theory and everything that we've taught forever. Subtext is the application that I built to bring Dramatica into the 21st century. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. And it currently is operating as a separate application, but it will be brought over fairly shortly. And then the Storyform builder is, if you've worked with Dramatica before, the whole story engine settings thing, where you can go through and very fine tune, pick out all the different choices of what your story form is or what you're looking into. In subtext, this was all hidden away, and it was more about your intent. So you had to kind of know what your story was about before you came to a story form. So it was less about learning Dramatica and more about connecting what you as an artist were trying to get across and how that converts into a story form. Um, but now that I have this in here, and when you would ask to build a story form, I would go off and do what's known in Dramatica as justification. So there's a difference between the model, which is what you're talking about, all those charts, or the big chart with all the towers. There's a difference between that and then what a story actually is. Because a narrative is not reality, it's our perception of reality. And so what we call it in Dramatica theory is a justified model. So it's a justified version of that model. And all that means is everything that you see in that tower has all been twisted and turned around and moved all over the place, depending on what choices you make here throughout the entire story form. So for instance, if I choose to do a steadfast story, it's telling the justification process, okay, we're going to do this differently than a change story. The order in which things are going to be justified has a meaning to it, and it will align the justification process with that. So it's a process that when I wrote it 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I made it purposely slow and it would take like 10 minutes. But for the most part, people are doing the same story form. They're always going over the same thing. So once I had it made, I just used that one and people were able to grab it. Now that I have this thing in here, um, it becomes necessary to make sure that they're already all have been justified and you don't have to sit there and wait for 10 minutes. So in the process of doing that, I'm reconfirming with Chris and Melanie, who originally invented Dramatica, or at least came up with all the concepts, to show them what I did in subtext and show how it really reflects what their original intent was. And so it's going to be an even better version. I think it'll be actually be even better than subtext. I think subtext was an even better version of the original Dramatica. So, and we just had a huge breakthrough yesterday where we are able to figure out some things. Um, I still don't have all of them justified out because I got that 10 minutes down to 1 second. But then, of course, then I have to run through the 32,000 and make sure they're all right. So I almost canceled today because I wanted to work on that. But then I was told, no, you have to do this. So I'm going to do it. Um, and so, yes, let me just see all these questions. This is great. Let's see. Perfect. I'm very excited. Okay. DUG weaving sessions in December are funny and instructive. Yeah, we could even do that today. I can show you. But I do find that a lot of narratologists tend to struggle to create a clean way to explain their process. Okay. And I can go over and I can explain to you, exactly what's going on here in the background. I mean, I don't mind. And I think I said this last week, but that model gets twisted up twice, so it gets double justified. And I'm very happy to just tell you that if it's a steadfast story, the first uh, justification the first justification is always like kind of like the grounded truth. So you can think of that as the steadfast one. So that um, in a steadfast story, the main character side of the story gets all justified at. And then on top of that goes the next one, which would be the influence character and the objective story. If it's the other way around, and instead we do like a change story, well, now the grounded truth will be kind of the objective view of everything and what the influence character believes. So then that gets set as kind of the justified model because their stuff isn't reality either. It's their version of reality. And then on top of that goes the main character. So there's a ton of thought that goes into it. It's very exhausting, um, and all kinds of different things that all these different choices change the order in which everything is justified, which then results in the order of the signposts. So um, I'm super excited because after yesterday, I think it's going to be the act orders are going to be different, but in a way that might resonate a little stronger with um, both the original idea, the concept, and probably your own intuition. I'd love to see how Dramatic breaks down Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse top to bottom. I could use that as an example. How much of Dramatic was borrowed from Plotto? I don't even know what Plotto does. You have to remember. I've seen that. I think 0% of Plotto has anything to do with Dramatica theory. I would be really surprised. There might be reflections of stuff, but I'm pretty sure absolutely zero was borrowed from it. Because I do know when it comes to doing the theory or when they were developing it, that the idea was they had written like a really bad movie or they made a really bad movie at USC. And then so then they spent 10 years like, okay, what's the psychology behind story? Not necessarily let's look at movies and see what the patterns are. It's more like, okay, why if we have problems, why don't we solve them? So then you can see how the quad of problem and solution and symptom and response were created off of that. And then a whole bunch of stuff. Um, and then when they went ahead and decided, like, let's turn this into an application, and then they, put a whole bunch of stuff in there. So as I was reminded yesterday, no model is perfect. I tend to think Dramatica theory is is perfect or can be perfected as much as possible. So that's my mission is to make sure that the original concepts are carried through from beginning to end. So that's why maybe if the original application was like 75% accurate, and I've always said subtext was like 85, maybe 90%, I think this version that I'll get out here in a week or so will be like 95, 97. It's not going to be perfect, but um, it'll be close to that. So, all right, Spider-Man. Well, I hadn't even, well, that's great. Well, let's just go with it. So let's see. Oh, so what I was saying was, because I got off on the teaching part of it, but the very best way that I found to do it is to just go through a story form based on another film. And what's really great is you can take advantage. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do it with all of the, you know, AI advances and all that kind of stuff. But you can take advantage both of their training because they know essential plot synopses and then mix that with the story forms that we've already, kind of professionally curated over time over the last 30 years. And then that's how you can learn it. So, for instance, I was using Michael Clayton as an example here, which is a pretty sophisticated narrative. Um, uh, I can't think of his name. Gilroy, right? Tony Gilroy? The same guy that did Andor. So, his whole family's great. They all are fantastic at writing stories and putting all that kind of stuff together. So for instance, and you can pick, there's like 650 different story forms that are in here. And for the most part, if you want to say confirmation bias, most of the stuff that we have are great stories. We don't have broken stories in there. So for the most part, these are 650 narratives that are really good. So for instance, just like Michael Clayton, and I'll switch to Spider-Man after I just show this example. But in every complete narrative, you have four through lines, which are the objective story, main character, influence character, and relationship story. Now, let's say you have no idea what any of that is. So if I were to come back here and go into Narrova and specifically set the agents to Dramatica theory so that it knows that what I want to do is learn about Dramatica theory, not necessarily create a story from scratch or really get into the depths of figuring out what my story form is, or once I have the story form, what to do from that. I'm just going to talk strict Dramatica theory. And so, yeah, you can read it, or you can just say, well, what are the four through lines and why are they important? And what this does is it's very, uh, it has blinders on. And so it only looks at all the podcasts that we've done, all the analysis for the last 30 years, all the emails I've answered, pretty much anything to do with Dramatica theory. And it's like kind of narrowed down that, has the theory book, goes through all of these discussions. So in the community forums, which I've been running for a very long time, this one's stuck, which is the one since 2014. I put a little new paint on it and upgraded everything. But it'll go through this, check to see, all the different, and collate everything so that you're getting more of an experience of it that's beyond just reading it. Um, so even if you don't know anything about Dramatica theory, you could just start here, and this is sometimes enough for everybody. And I tend, when I go over and I do these classes and stuff, I see where it says like your plan for you, Jim. I skip this when I'm going over it, but if you're learning, I would definitely read through these, because all this is doing is it's setting up its own plan to then discuss about it. So it's kind of telling you what it's going to tell you about, and then it tells you, and then at the end it tells you what it told you, which is why it's pretty accurate and pretty fairly up to date. So you'll see it references specific sections out of the book, or it might even grab all the art from the articles that I wrote on narrative first, because there was a time when I'd write a new article every week when I was at DreamWorks, and I would just go through and cover different stuff. I essentially was writing for this AI, even though it didn't exist at the time. So then I could just upload all those articles, and it's all set here. So it will tell you the objective story is the plot. So I'll just do a basic little thing here. Main character is the personal baggage for the personal point of view, not necessarily the storytelling, but who we are and who we experience from that first person perspective, all that personal trauma. The influence character is the you perspective, which is somebody outside of us who reflects back to us our own issues and usually results in that thing about you and I are both alike. No, I'm nothing like you. That's where that's coming from. So it's a very psychological reason why that's there, because they're literally just a projection of you. And then the relationship in early dramatic, it always had to be between the influence character and the main character. And for the most part, it is, because if you're talking about the we perspective, it's just natural tendency. I and you and we have a relationship, but there are a million narratives where that relationship is not with the influence character, it's with another person. So, and not necessarily an influence character handoff situation, but a concrete relationship that's not the same. So it's really about the growth of a relationship, even though this tells you, it's MC9. See, it's pretty much for the same part or the same sort of thing. I didn't love Andor. It's slow. It's been a fight for me because everyone loved it. I'm slowly going through all the Star Wars, but I've only seen season one. Oh, aside from personal preference, why didn't I? I'm trying to learn. Oh, I would say just because it's so slow, and I think the original intent was to make it a lot longer than it was, and so you'll probably like the second one because they tried to cram in like 3 years worth of stuff into 1 year. I'm trying to learn because I'm interested in the psychological attributes as well as the narrative one. Yeah, So yeah, that to me is great. And the real fun part is using Dramatica on your friends and family because you can use it. And it has been used in real world situations. There are articles where you can look at the narratives of, I think one of them was about Toyota, and the other one was, I think, cable TV versus streaming. Different people have wanted to know what the narratives of certain situations are in the real world. Um, so once you start to understand um, the psychological aspects of Dramatica, then it's really fun slash challenging to then look at that in your real life. Uh, you know, the one thing would be the justification thing. Anytime anybody says they can't do something, or they can do something, or they need to do something, or they needn't do something, or they should do something, or they shouldn't do something, or they want to do something, or they won't do something, those are all indications that that person is justifying, and it's actually a part of story that's in here because it's a way nobody needs anything, obviously, and nobody can do anything. When they say they can, they're justifying giving themselves permission to do it. And so that's all in the model, which is really fun to see. Okay, so just even getting just the outline here, if you really want to dive into Dramatica theory, the other agents will kind of steer you more towards making a story, forming it, and doing all that kind of stuff, analyzing your work. If you just want to learn the concepts, then I would definitely just tap that and set it to Dramatica theory, and it'll explain why they're important. The idea is that the reason why it feels complete is because you're addressing conflict from all four different points of view. Like, I have a problem, you have a problem, we have a problem, and they have a problem. In real life, we can't do I and they at the same time. So that's why people love stories, because you can actually be both within and without at the same time. So, yeah, and you'll see Hull, that's me. This is an article I wrote back in 2018 about perspective being the point. So it'll always refer to that stuff as far as the four through lines go. So in each through line, if I were to bring up, let's go ahead and do this and bring up the Storyform builder. You'll see at the top of every through line here, if I pull back, you'll see objective story, main character, influence character, and relationship story. At the very top, you'll see four aspects of this story form, and they're repeated in each through line. So domain, concern, issue, and problem, domain, concern, issue, and problem. Even though they have different names, they're really all talking about the same thing, which are just problems. Where's the source of conflict? That's why it says what's the source of conflict in the story. And they're just different scales. So the domain is the biggest way of appreciating where that source of conflict is coming from. And then you can get into a little more detail, and then the issue gets into even more detail, and then finally you get down to the core problem of why everything is a problem in the story, or at least for this through line. And so you can get an idea of that through line. The very best way, I always call them like the top four, is these four, because they can all combine together to give you a really great idea of what that narrative is about. So I just picked Michael Clayton for this example because, one, I think it's fantastic. Two, it's not Star Wars, because everybody does Star Wars all the time, which I can go back to if you want to. But all I said was, what is, I mean, this is a horrible sentence, but what is the main character, domain, concern, issue, and problem of Michael Clayton? And so what it'll do is it'll go and look up the specific story form that we have personally vetted, and it uses a bunch of techniques so that it's grounded in that truth, as opposed to like if you use like chat or something, you're going to get something that's way off. Context is so important when it comes to AI stuff. Um, and especially if you're doing story form, all a story form is context. So if you have the wrong story form, you're going to get a wrong reading as to what the story is about. So if I just ask the same question in like chat, it's going to kind of look at to see what the definitions of or the meaning of different aspects of dramatic story form, and then it's going to guess, but they're not going to line up. So it's not going to be a thematically coherent story form. So that's all the work that we do here, especially in Narrova here, is to make sure everything's aligned to that. So in Michael Clayton, the George Clooney character, his domain is in physics. So if I go back to the Storyform builder here, you'll see there are 4 different domains of conflict that a through line could explore. The first 2 are external conflict, and the bottom 2 are the internal conflict. So when somebody has or is exploring physics as their domain, their core personal baggage is the author's exploring not so much like their attitudes or a kind of like fixed situation where they're stuck into. It's more like what they're doing is causing them a lot of trouble. And if they would just stop doing that, then they'd be fine. So if you haven't seen it, and I will do Spider-Man, don't worry. And it's funny because that'll sync up perfectly with this. In Michael Clayton, he's gambling. He's a fixer for insurance companies. So in other words, if um, there's been some naughty behavior in corporations and they need to pay somebody off or whatever, like he's the one there to make it all like clean up the mess. And then that extends to his personal life. So if we were to pull out all the stuff that he does for the corporations and it's just him personally, he's got huge gambling debts, that kind of stuff. So that's the focus of his main character through line, and that's physics. But that's very broad. Like we'll see. I picked physics here, and previously, if I undid that choice, you'll see there's 32,768 different possible story forms. And these are all the ones that I have to generate. When I pick this and I put it into physics, that cuts it down, but there's still 8,000. So as we go down, you'll see it'll narrow it at a bigger and bigger rate as we go down into more concretely. What it also does too is it infers other aspects, and this is where Dramatica is separated from everything else, in that this isn't just my appreciation of the film and thinking like, oh no, this is where his problems are. This is the very best arrangement, given the fact that all of these other aspects have to relate to one another. Like they all line up. So if you have a main character who is exploring kind of like the stuff that they do is causing them problems, then to balance out the narrative, the influence character, that you reflection, is somebody who's very dysfunctional. They have a dysfunctional way of thinking, and that's what's influencing and creating conflict from their point of view. And if you remember, that's his friend Wilkinson, the actor, who loses his mind. He was kind of in the same position. He might have even been his boss, but now I got to do the right thing. This is kind of a story about like U North. U North is the fictional, but it's obviously like a Monsanto type thing where they poisoned a bunch of people and there's a lawsuit. So he his friend freaks out, and that's how the story starts. He has a very dysfunctional way of seeing the world. I mean, it's the right way to think, or at least that's how the author positions it as the right way to think. But it's the perfect foil for the main character who's doing all kinds of dysfunctional stuff. So right here, like even in just like the last 15 minutes, and just doing one aspect of the story form, you've already learned like an amazing amount of Dramatica theory that you can apply to any of your stories like right away. Even if you just did just this, and it had the one inference here, I know where my main character is coming from, and I know why the influence character is even in there, and then you can just make sure it's quite balanced. Really great authors do this intuitively, and you likely would do it intuitively also, but there might be areas that you don't know intuitively that this will point out to you. So the overall thesis of today's episode is just to use the story forms that have already been vetted, the 650 plus, as grounding points for learning different concepts. So right now we just did the domain, which is the biggest. And then so all right, if we're going to look at physics, what's a little more specific for this story? What really is causing all his trouble? And in the story form here, it's all about doing. So if I went back into the story form here and I looked at the different concerns, you'll see, all right, if you're going to explore a story where what the character is doing is the source of their conflict, not their attitudes or something like that, then you'll want to explore these four aspects of physical activity. One is just engaging in physical activity, which seems pretty obvious. The other one is like gathering information, which would be learning. Obtaining is like achieving something or controlling it or possessing it or even letting go. Or understanding, like coming to an understanding of what that is. And that's like a physical appreciation of an understanding of it, as opposed to like more of an internal thing. So all four of these end up being an act in the story, because part of the process of going through a narrative is trying to figure out where the source of conflict is. So based on that justification process, these will go in a certain order to get you the story that you want. But right now, we're not talking about the order. We're talking about where that source of conflict is coming from. And in Michael Clayton, and that's his name, he does, goes through all of these, loses his car, like all kinds of stuff, as he learns and investigates and tries to avoid dealing with all this. But really, it's really just an exploration of what you do and what you don't do. Like basically like do the right thing, but it's almost like you're not even thinking about what it is that you're doing, but that's causing a lot of trouble both for you personally and then also a really great example is his son who he picks up from school, takes to school. He's not even listening, he's just doing it. I'm just doing it. I'm taking you there. you're talking to me. I'm not even really listening. That's like a core personal problem that's outside of the whole corporate thing, but it's a really good example of like if he would just do it a different way, then he wouldn't have so much disconnection with the people around him. And then you'll see the flip side to balance everything out. Now, the influence character will be all about being like behaving a certain way, or in this case, adopting a way of thinking about things that seems crazy, but he's being a good person, which is the nice reflection of what uh, Michael Clayton should go towards. So that's the next one down. Then you can get even to even more detail. Well, if it's doing, then what are my possible issues that I could explore? So if you're going through and looking at engaging in certain kinds of physical activity, you have issues of enlightenment, which is an understanding beyond your current understanding of the world, your experiences, gaining familiarity, your skills, like how good you are at something, and then of course wisdom, which is just basic, like how wise you are. So those four are a fractal of doing, and we get into more and more depth. In this one, in the story form, the issue is experience. Off the top of my head, I could tell you, um, I mean, he's very experienced. He's really good at his job, and that's okay. But I would think there would be something more. So I might even look at this. Oh, these are just the definitions. A thematic focus on familiarity, accumulated know-how, and what prior exposure brings to a situation. Almost like a been there, done that. But that's not enough for me, right? Like, so knowing what you know about the film and its plot, can you help me understand how his main character issue could be experience? So that's one way to do it, which is just to lean on the AI's knowledge of the world or whatever it's been trained on. That's one way to do it, which should do a pretty decent job of getting you closer to what that actually means. So let's see if you want. Oh, okay. So what it did here is it handed it off to the story forming agent, um, because for various reasons, sometimes it'll do that because it feels like the story forming agent can help you out better because of the stuff that it has. So yeah, it says I can define Dramatica theory, but applying a specific story form to a specific film requires the hands-on story forming side. All right. Um, although it didn't seem to continue it. Hello there. Can you help me out? It's almost like you got transferred by phone to another agent, but then that person doesn't know they're waiting for you to ask a question. All right, ask them to contrast. Oh, that's funny. If you want, ask them also to contrast experience with its counterpoint. So with the issue, yeah, you focus in on what that particular issue is, but because of the nature of where it is in the model, you have that sliding scale of its counterpoint. So when you're looking at people's experience and all that stuff, you also want to measure it against their skills, their relative skills. So let's see. It's taking a long time. So it's either going through and reading the entire plot. Okay, maybe that is what it's doing. All right, so you want a film-specific explanation of how Michael's main character issue of experience plays out in Michael Clayton, given the MC through line, blah, 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 blah. All right, hold on one second. Yeah, there's this like little popping thing, which I have fixed in the latest. I will get that out to everybody. Let's make sure it goes through all the way through. Okay. So where is it? Okay, under the doing concern, experience is the thematic lens of lived-in familiarity, what you've picked up from countless prior cleanups, and how relying on that familiarity both helps and harms. That's like the been there, done that. Oh, the tension emerges when Michael's, I've seen this before, I know how to fix it. That's exactly what I was saying. Approach collides with situations where close enough is not within tolerances, generating personal trouble. I'm not a miracle worker, I'm a janitor. Is that what he says? That identity is built on accumulated experience cleaning up messes, not on formal legal prowess. So it kind of jumped ahead to the problem of non accurate. So let me just show you where that is. So if I picked experience here, that'll narrow it down. Now we're going to be down to what? 512 just out of three choices, right? Because we're getting closer and closer to it. And then within experience, you have these four. Expectations, you probably know, people have expectations or missed expectations. That could be a problem. Determinations are the opposite of that, where it's like, no, I know this is how it is. This is why things are the way they are, or they're very determined. And then accurate and non-accurate, you can kind of think of people who are hyper obsessed with things being accurate, like me and Dramatica theory, where I want it to be really accurate, or people who are coming from a place where they're just driven by what's outside of tolerances, like what's beyond the pale, almost like they're deviating from the norm or they're way out there, and that's a problem. And I think that is the actual problem in um, Michael Clayton. So for him, his problem is that he's working outside of tolerances, meaning he's gambling, he's doing things that are non-accurate given the kind of life you should lead. So he's going beyond that. And obviously his job as janitor is to clean up everything that's outside of tolerances. Um, and just to cut to the chase, in the objective story, it'll be the same problem because he is the change character, right? So the resolve here will be inferred as change. So that's why he's in this story, because his personal issues reflect what's going on in the objective story, but they're at like a 90-degree angle, whereas the influence character is almost like a full projection. This is skewed off to the side, and that's why, you know, if you can think of giant corporation dumping toxic fumes, they're working outside of tolerances, and it's like, okay, how can we clean this up, right? Um, and so that's why they're connected together here. But already, like, seriously, 30 minutes, and it's like a ton of theory, but I'm doing it through a lens of a film that what I would do is I would pick a film or one that you've already seen or you're really familiar with, watch it, and then either do it as you're going through it or watching it and going through it, either on your phone or whatever with Narrova, or do it afterwards, just so you have an idea of where he's coming from. So what this did is really cool. Now it said how experience shows up on the screen. So his fixer routines, hit and run client, mobbed up bar debt, and endless firm cleanups handled with the same playbook. Why this is experience. He leans on what has worked out in the world, not on textbook skill, doing things the way a seasoned cleaner would. His history with Arthur, that's the name of his friend. So he assumes Arthur's break is another manageable episode and tries the usual containment moves. Familiarity binds him. His experience says we can manage this. And that's kind of like the nature of his conversations with him. When it comes to reading U North and Karen, Karen's the one who's kind of working for U North to clean all this up. He recognizes patterns of corporate containment and sets the hotel bribe trap and records it. Years of seeing how these people operate lets him engineer a practical worldly action, not a clever legal maneuver. Street instincts, that's somebody who's non-accurate, working beyond tolerances. And gender and compromises. So rationalizes kind of gray area fixes. Somebody who's more accurate, is going to be like, hey, no, let's toe the line. Let's do what that's why expectations, what everybody expects, it's kind of similar in there, as opposed to always working in this kind of gray area sort of thing. That's a really great way to think of non-accurate. And then it brought in the counterpoint here, because Karen is a great reflection of that because she's hyper professional, very skilled, optics obsessed decision making. Some tensions you see on screen, tying it back to the story form, went through and did all of that stuff. And then, if you want, I can map each act's major doing beats to how that experience helps or hurts or contrasts. So you can really dive into it. So in the past, in the original version of Dramatica, you're kind of reliant on the 3 or 4 interns that were hired to go through and answer these questions and explain why experience is the issue here or why non-accurate is. Because we have the story form and because you have access to this whole AI world where it can just look it up in terms of what it knows, then you can really dive into it, but on your own level, like what it is that you're super interested in. So this is one way. The other really, really, really great way to do it is to actually upload the screenplay and then ask it against the story form. Because then it will go through and analyze the actual screenplay and not kind of cut corners. I mean, this is a really quick, wonderful way to do it, but you could also go through and I think, do I have an example of it? I don't think so. Is this the one? Oh, yeah. So I was going through just in terms of the new justifications, and I took the act order or I took Juno, if you remember that screenplay, that film back in the day. I think it was '07 or something like that, '08, where she gets pregnant and then she hands it off to another family, more deserving family or a family that wants to take it over. So what I did is I uploaded the script. That's why it says please read through the entire script again and find ample evidence for this new act order. So this would be the new act order based on the new justifications. Um, so in addition to where the source of conflict is, you can actually then track what's supposed to happen in each act to get you the kind of ending that you want. So if you have the screenplay, this is really great because what it'll do is it'll then read through knowing what the story form is and then find specific instances of where future shows up as in yeah, well back in the day. That was 20 years ago. Future, so for instance like act 1, Juno is teenager gets pregnant. And so the conflict there is the actual pregnancy and like what she's going to do with it, right? So it actually has to do with universe. So then the 4 concerns that are part of universe are past, present, progress, and future. They go in a different order based on how the film is set up and the dynamics that are set in there, such that the first act it will explore the future, like okay, where's our head at? How are things going to be? And what it did is it actually went through and found for different quotes from the actual screenplay. This weird symbol, I will do it as soon as I get the story forms in there. This is specifically, it's a weird OpenAI thing where it's actually referring to the actual page. I just have to translate that for you. Um, but yeah, these are all specific instances of, all right, well, here the conflict is coming from intentions and promises and guarantees about what will happen. Then that slips into the present. Here are some more instances of it. Then that slips into the past. This isn't what we agreed on. We put that in the paper 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later, she's in our living room. And then the very, very last would be the last act, which would be progress. So, how things are changing, which would be Vanessa. If you're still in, I'm still in. Because I'm pretty sure Mark, her husband, like decides to be a child again or something. It's been a while. And then goes through the main character through line because that'll be a different story, and then the relationship story through line will also find instances of that. So I found that to be really helpful, especially if you've written a whole draft, you know what the story form is, and you want to check it. It'll go through and then show you how probably for the most part you have it, but then you might be missing one or two. But because there's so many available scripts online, it's just a real easy thing to add it into the conversation context. So for here in Narrova, there are three different sets of context. One is the conversation, another one's a story, and the other one's a story form. This one right here, you can check to see what is a part of this context right now is the Juno, the screenplay. And then I can always go back and ask more questions about it. All right. So that to me is the very best way to learn Dramatica. Like that, that's how I learned it. Obviously, I went to all the 30 years of user group analysis. And what that is once a month, Chris Huntley, who's one of the Dramatica Theory co-creators, he and I host a group analysis. You can see last week we did The Boy and the Heron from Mr. Miyazaki. And you can watch it. It's about an hour and a half, and we go through and figure out what the story form was for that film. So everybody wants to do Spider-Man. Now, the funny thing about Spider-Man Into the Universe, or Into the Spider-Verse, is the through lines are exactly the same as we see here in Michael Clayton. So we can just be in the same headspace. I will lock. Oh, what do I lock? All right, so physics. I actually think doing is the same thing. This part will be different. So let me reset. It should still keep. All right, great. So, and if you think of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Miles, it's not like Black Panther or something like that where it's all about him being the Spider-Man and he's the chosen one, which would be more of a universe type thing. I mean, there are aspects of it, right? But if you really got into the source of conflict compared to the other three through lines, that's the real trick. You can't just pick one on its own, because on its own you might say, well, yeah, he is the one Spider-Man. Um, but in that, it's very much like what he does. It's the same thing, or what he can do to perform to be the Spider-Man to kind of live up to what that first Peter Parker told him. Because clearly, the objective story problem is universe. Because it's literally about multiverses colliding, and the fact that the concern on everybody's mind is how things are changing, the way things are going. The universes are collapsing, everything's collapsing in on itself. Makes complete sense. It will also infer that his influence character will have a dysfunctional way of thinking, and just about the fact that he just is pretending to be Spider-Man, which would be Peter B. Parker, who has a very funny dysfunctional way of being. And then their relationship story will be about their immediate responses in terms of like kind of like the mentorship sort of thing. So this is the arrangement of the through lines there, but I only know that because I know all the all the story forms. If you don't know, you could just start a new conversation here, clear the context, and we don't want to talk about Juno, so let's clear that out. Clear context. And let's go back to, let's just do story forming. And oh yeah, we want to look into the story form for Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. What do we want to talk about? Do we want to talk about the main character? Do we want to talk about the objective story? Somebody say back here, top to bottom. I mean, we could do, let's do objective story just to do something different. Let's do the objective story first and look at the domain, concern, issue, problem of that through line. All right. All right. Preparing story form search. I hope I spelled it right. And then it picks up on the title. All right. That's a good sign. Okay, cool. So yeah, it's going to confirm the structural choices, map it to the hierarchy, which is the classes are the big one, then the types, then the variation, then the element, um, and then go through. Hopefully it's not going to try and help me story form. All right, perfect. All right, so we pulled from our narrative matrix for this title. So the domain of Spider-Verse is universe. The fixed, and why is that a source of conflict? The fixed situation of a super collider under Brooklyn destabilizing reality. Everyone is stuck inside a multiversal collapse in the making. So, Michael Clayton is about a universe too, which is U North is dumping or had dumped a whole bunch of crap into the river. Everybody's sick. It's the same kind of conflict, different story, different genre. That's where the storytelling is different based on what is actually causing the conflict underneath. It's very funny that people would bring this up and they're the same story form. Progress, the way things are going. All the victims are getting sicker and sicker from U North in Michael Clayton. And then I already described the crisis escalates, glitching worsens, timelines drift, the collider cycles intensify, tension rises around how fast things are deteriorating. So you always have progress in a story, but this is specifically about progress being the source of the conflict. And then threat is the issue. All right. With its variation of security, the perceived and actual vulnerabilities, Brooklyn's annihilation, the spider people disintegrating, Kingpin's looming danger drive choices. Arguments hinge on what's at risk versus what would keep everyone safe. Okay. Like, is it a threat? Is it not a threat? Are we threatening enough? With the core, okay, so this is very different. The core problem being expectation. Um, so it's not accurate or non-accurate. This one is about misplaced or rigid expectations create conflict. The real, the core one is Kingpin expects the Collider to restore his family. That's perfect. So if I came down here and I picked threat, and then I go down here and I pick expectation, you can almost tie the antagonist of a story, especially in something like this where it's really clear antagonist slash villain type thing, to what the problem is in the story, almost like they're the ones creating it. So the whole reason for doing this whole collider thing, because his expectation could be reunited with him. That's what's like driving all the conflict in the story. So I go back here. Criminals expect control. Heroes and authorities expect disaster. Those expectations lock everyone into fraught courses of action. So the whole narrative explores what happens when you have misplaced or rigid expectations, with the solution, the natural solution that is inferred is determination. So discerning the causes behind that. And I I used to have the exact answer for what that is. I know I'm pretty sure Peter B. Parker says something to Miles, almost like you choose who you want to be, or I choose to be. I know there's something there. I love the film. I think it's great. I can't remember it quite. But that would be, I think that's the determination that seals it. Also, Miles finally, instead of being so concerned with all meeting everybody else's expectations, again, there's only two choices. He could either have a problem of expectation or a problem of proven. I know it's expectation because he is very clearly somebody who alters his nature in response to a problem. When I choose that, again, it will lock the main character to the objective story through the problem. So while Kingpin has his expectations of being united and he's going to destroy all the universes just so he can reunite with his family, Miles has his own personal, like, what's his name? That first Spider-Man that died, like, hey, do your best or whatever it is, all living up to those expectations, his uncle's expectations, oh, his parents' expectations for school, all of that stuff. And then at the end, he chooses, I forget what he says before he blasts him, but that is definitely determination. And that's a way of signaling both that the main character has completed their arc in the change and alter their nature, but it also resolves the objective story problems. How will I know when I'm oh yeah, how will I know I'm ready? You don't. It's a leap of faith. Yeah. So that's the author's really getting there. So he's asking in terms of like expectation, how will I know? Like what can I expect? And it's not that. It's like, no, it's you make the choice. And I know he says something right before he blasts him. I forget what it is. That's all it is, determination. Yeah. But I know he says something too before he doesn't he like cut his he's holding on to him and he cuts the tire or something, he falls back. I forget what it was. Um yeah, Kingpin's unwavering expectation that the Collider will deliver his family no matter the cost collides with the Spider team's increasingly determined push to shut it down. Yeah, because they're this that's the more determined they are, and the more they work on the causes, as opposed to looking towards the effects, which is the expectation, then people that are sitting there like, oh my god, the universe is that's always going to create a problem. Instead, go towards the cause and fix that, and you'll solve it. Sequel is no, I'm gonna do my own thing. Oh, that sequels when he does that. But doesn't he blast Kingpin too? The sequel is very interesting because it's it not that it's not a complete story, but it's two story forms where you think it's over, but then there's another story form that they will complete in the third one. Before zapping Wilson, he asked if he's ever heard of the shoulder touch. Yeah, let me focus on this one. I know he says, well, watch, I'll do this. Okay. So then that's a great example. Okay. I love this film. And I do remember when Miles was fighting Kingpin at the end. Doesn't he blast him with his, like, you guys are going to laugh at me, but his spider electrical blast thingy? But he says something right before. But what was it? But I feel like he. What's very interesting too is like when you get into this, you'll find authors gravitate towards the same story form. Um, the original producer, directors, writers, the two guys, they're super talented. They did this. They did, I think, 21 Jump Street, and they also did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. The story forms are very similar. Expectations are a common theme. You're asking for the exact line, not hey. Miles does it and simply says, then he delivers the venoms for remembrance. You might be remembering he spoke just before is you gotta go home, man. Oh, that's determination. Uh See, this is weird because story forming, it's like it's trying to help me write this as opposed to just going over it. I know, but he says something. Well, this would be a thing where if I had the screenplay, I would upload it. Um, doesn't Miles say something that reflects determination? Yeah, because he has him beat, and then he does he just say hey? He doesn't just say hey. I mean, these are all instances of determination, but oh, that's weird. Is it to Peter? I think this is misaligned. To Peter B. Parker, I'm doing this, and is confident push into the sequence. I got this. Plus his earlier post leap of faith mantra, I can do this. These are all instances of determination. Um, oh, you have it open. Oh, you could send it to me. That'd be amazing. He asks him about the shoulder touch before he does. Pluto said, I know what you're trying to do and it won't work. They're gone. I have it open. He says, I'll always have my family. Oh, that's really messed up if that's what he says. Anyway, it's something like that. Um, ever heard of the shoulder touch? He says, I'll always have my family. I guess that's kind of determination. I guess I might be conflating that with what he does with what's his name in the second one. Doesn't he say Kachow or something? I know that's cars, but all right. Point being, it's a really fantastic way. I wish I had the screenplay to actually learn about what those different elements are all about. Um, so to go and I'll look back at the screenplay or somebody can send it to me. If you have for Miles here back in the Storyform builder, you can see we're down to like just 32 possibilities here. So he's trying to meet everybody's expectations. So that's the problem and solution. And then this goes back to the original thing why Melanie and Chris worked on Dramatica theory, which is, well, if that's their problem, why don't they solve it? So in this story, yeah, he has all these like trying to live up to his family's expectations and the kind of student he's supposed to be and all that stuff. But he doesn't know that's a problem because if he knew that was a problem, then he would just solve it. Instead, this is buried underneath. And instead, he's focused on the symptom of what that looks like, which is being accurate, which is basically being good enough. Like trying to match. I can't keep up with things. I can't be good enough. I'm like accurate. I'm trying to match up with all these things. And then his response is to act outside of tolerances, which is kind of like how he blows off steam with his uncle, could kind of be that. But again, I would just ask like, all right, so if his family's expectations are what are driving him as his MC problem, and I can see how his symptom is likely about, not being good enough, accurate enough for his mom and dad. But then how is he responding with non-accurate? Please provide 3 instances. How do you use this to measure that quality? Oh, yeah, they're great. I love them too. Yeah, Batman to Lego. Oh, that's the other one, the Lego movie. Yeah. Um, but it's not a good movie. How do you use this to measure? So, like, that's a subjective thing, whether or not it's a good movie or not. Like, there are I consider like great movies that might not have a complete story form. You probably totally disagree with me, but I love Tree of Life. It's not a complete story. I'm totally okay with that. It doesn't need to be. There's just, and that's just my personal thing. I just love Terrence Malick stuff, even though I know they don't necessarily have complete stories. I'm totally cool with that. And on the other hand, you could have a really great story form. Like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs is a very complete story, but it doesn't, it might not for you personally be something that you really personally love. But very clearly, every single film that they've worked on has a complete story because they're very good natural storytellers. I don't necessarily think they use dramatic theory. I don't know, they might. Um, but it usually follows that if a certain creative group continues to do great stories, they naturally have an instinct for what makes a complete story form. I want to see how Miles, feeling crushed by family expectations, responds with the element non-accurate. Um, Accurate versus non-accurate. So accurate again is like meeting exact standards and being good enough. So then non-accurate is acting outside of tolerances. Ooh, the try to flunk quiz gambit. He's being measured or graded expected to be accurate at an elite school, so his response is not accurate. He intentionally answers everything wrong to fail out, gaming the test rather than meeting the standard. The teacher clocks it, exposing that his response was a deliberate outside. Is that what really happened? I don't remember that. I have a vague recollection of that, but that's a perfect example of non-accurate. The Alchemax heist escape. High stakes precision is required. Get the file and get out. Oh, instead of a clean data pull, Miles panics and yanks the entire computer and then the monitor. Okay, and then the do-it-yourself suit and gear. Post leap of faith. The accurate Spider-Man standard. His spray paints. Oh, store-bought suit, customizes it, tapes up gear, and creates an improvised identity rather than conforming to a precise official model. Is that right? They are Hero's Journey fans. Yes. Yeah. So like Hero's Journey, and I talk about this in the class too. Hero's Journey, Save the Cat, all that stuff are very subjective points of view of narrative. So they're very heavy on the storytelling, very much on the audience experience. Dramatica theory is very objective based, meaning it's not so much about the experience, but all the ingredients that go into it. So yeah, this may seem really clinical, but it very accurately tells you all the ingredients that make up this story. Now, the other side of it is you need to have some talent to turn this into a story. So then that's where the subjective stuff comes in. So you need both. I'm not saying like one's better than the other, but if you're trying to get to an objective truth of like trying to figure out where holes in a story are, and this just comes from because I worked at Disney and DreamWorks for so long and worked on so many movies that had broken stories and that had really clear holes in them. Sometimes we figured it out in the last 2 months. Sometimes it was just a loss and nobody figured it out. So when I found Dramatica, I was like, whoa, this is why doesn't everybody know about this so that it could all work together so that we could have great stories. Um, yeah. So oh, that's right. He signs him an essay about great expectations. That's right. That actually made me think that they do use Dramatica because they very literally actually isn't that what he spray paints his expectation? I know he writes it in a book. It's like so broadcasted, which is it's interesting because anytime you broadcast story form directly, that's where you're kind of hitting the audience over the head with what the story's about, as opposed to hiding it um behind uh or under hiding it within the storytelling. When you like just write and say great expectations, you're like saying, hey, by the way, the problem is expectations, then it's kind of like in your face. Yeah. I was a transmedia director, in the gaming space, which is what started my hunt for narrative structures. So you would probably really love the whole play mode that's in subtext, which was a project we did with USC over the last year. which essentially necessitated the combination of narrative first and dramatica, which is to take a story form and then be able to play within it within a narrative. It works really, really well because you use the story form as kind of your guardrails, and then you can kind of keep the thematic intent of the author. You can probably see this where no matter what the characters do, you just constantly pull it back into the story form using the story form that, and you can go through sequence by sequence. And instead of having to write out every tree for every narrative, you I mean, sure, you might have like world things that are, like this is you only have so many rooms in a castle or whatever, but the meaning of why a scene progresses from one scene to the next is not something that's been pre-thought. It has a story form intent behind it, in the same way that I showed the act order was like future and then progress. So you do all the future stuff. Once all the future stuff is exhausted, then you start doing all the progress stuff. And so that way you can gear a narrative towards, you can either focus it to be one story form, or the really cool thing is as you're going through, if the user breaks the story form, you just recalculate the story form and you generate everything else, and then you can move it onto that rail. I believe we heard Jim's childhood wound. I don't know. I had lots of wounds. I will tell you this is very close to my blind spot. I won't tell you what it is, but it's very close. Um, yeah, I believe it's on his yellow notepad, but it might be on the portrait of Aaron at the end. Yeah. Makes me wish I had this when we had to fight the game designers on why they couldn't do one thing or another. Yeah. That's the really exciting thing is you can use story forms to a way where there's a world where you can create all these this story and all these different like interactive narratives, but you don't have to be the one writing out every single tree. You use the combination of AI to do something that you possibly couldn't do by yourself, yet still maintaining the intent of the author, like the integrity of it, as opposed to just giving it wholesale, will just do everything for me sort of thing. Um, okay. So then that is here for this thing. So then just to finish the story form for Spider-Man, and then I'll close it out. But let's see, like linear is very definitely cause and effect reasoning. Actions are what drive the major plot points. I'm blowing by these options. There's no time limit or deadline. It really is how much space is left before the whole thing blows and all the universes collapse in on each other. The outcome is success, like the reverse um the the progress of it, they reverse. The goal is to, change the way things are going. So if the universe is collapsing, the goal is to like unravel that. I love the consequence here of preconscious, which again is something that's inferred. And the idea is that the consequences are the immediate responses. And a really great thing you can do is for the protagonist and the antagonist of your story, the protagonist is aligned with the story goal. So that's Miles, right? Obviously, he's pursuing, and also people are pursuing him to kind of reverse that trend of the way things are going. And then the antagonist is usually aligned some way or another with the consequence. So that whole really cool sequence of Kingpin when he's thinking about his family, the reason they died is because of a preconscious immediate response, because they saw him like freaking out, beating up that guy, and then they freaked out. And that's a preconscious response, like a fight or flight type response. Believe it or not, that's a natural balance to the progress. When it comes to progress things in the external world, the mental equivalent of that internally is fight or flight. So it's just really great how that was tied together in here. Um, the pivotal elements here. So Miles will be pretty much he's the one that's all about expectation, and then Peter B. Parker, you are who you choose to be. Is that from the movie? I don't. It's from something. And then at the end, Miles resolves everything. All right, I think that's pretty much it, right? That should be the whole thing. Yeah, so now we're down. So this is the complete story form for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that you might not, I mean, I don't even know how the heck does this, how does this play out? Like, I'm specifically looking at the influence character, and I haven't even talked about Peter B. Parker. He has psychology, being, desire, and ending. So if I were to go into here, oh, you know what you also could do? Watch, you could do this. This is fun. So this is the whole story form. So I'm going to grab it here, copy, and then when I go into here, um, I'm going to do, let me just do a brand new one. Because this kind of is how you could do it in your own story. I'm going to go into story encoding, which is, as it says, turn intent into concrete storytelling. So I just want to know, based on following story form, go through and illustrate it using Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse as an example. This is the actual story form for it. I could take this story form and say, hey, I want to do this in Southeast Asia and I want to set it in this time period. Give me the same story, but let's build it out. You could build out the same exact story, but have a completely different story form or, yeah, storytelling on top of it. But you could also do this where you take this. I would probably, copy paste all this in here. I would even upload the screenplay just to have the exact thing and then have it go through and illustrate all of these. Have that on my phone, put it on the streaming, start watching it, and then just go act by act and get a really good feel for it. And you're going to pick up every single time you do it, you'll pick up on one of these aspects. So there's like 75 different aspects here of a story form that are all balanced, like they all work together, right? Like I showed how the problem of the objective story and the main character are tied together in a change story, but you'll notice too, theory and hunch are repeated here in the influence character for the symptom and response. Whichever character is a steadfast character, they can do that. Let's see here. So yeah, it's going to go through and create sections for all of these different story points. So if you're working on your own story form, you don't necessarily need a complete one. You can build it like halfway, copy it, go over to Narrova, kind of work it through, see if you're going in the right direction. And that might even be enough for you to go ahead and build out the story that you're working on. You don't necessarily have to have a complete one to get some sort of value out of it. All right, there's quite a bit that it's going through. Yeah, if I open it up, you'll see it's going through all the different things. Let's see what it has. Oh, cool. I'll make a nice little chart here. So yeah, it's going to go through all of these aspects that are in the story form and then bring up examples of it from, yeah, here's a great example. I just blew past the linear cause and effect reasoning. That's one aspect where the main character will either be somebody who kind of balances context and relationships, or there's somebody who does step by step cause and effect. And he literally says, if I can get the goober and shut the collider, everyone goes home. That's very cause and effect. Yeah, Miles abandons trying to meet others' expectations of what Spider-Man must be and embraces a self-determined version, his leap of faith. Yeah, that would be the change that's in there. All the actions, here are the options, and then success. The collider is destroyed, the multiverse stabilizes, Spider People return. Good. Miles reserves his personal inequity, self-doubt, and identity, and reconciles with his father. So then it'll go through the objective story, and it went through and illustrated all the different aspects of it. Okay. Security. So catalyst and inhibitor. Maybe you don't know what that is. All right. So When safety is at stake, Aunt May, civilians in the city, events spike forward, everyone moves. So the catalyst is like, well, when people are really concerned about the security or they feel insecure, whatever, then conflict's going to increase. Anxiety will stall the momentum. So Peter's worry about Miles, Miles worrying about measuring up, it collapses, gives him a chance to step out of the objective story, and then you can have some more quiet moments with the main character or the influence character. Here's his personal journey. Yeah. Okay. Influence character. This is what I wanted to go through. So Peter's methods revolve around role playing and mental coping patterns, being a mentor he doesn't believe he is, right? He plays at being a mentor, husband, or hero. His discomfort in the role drives his influence on Miles. His issue is desire. He desires to go home and avoid hard feelings. He also wants to avoid being hurt again. Perfect. Ending. Peter's, yeah, is hung up on endings. His marriage ended. His Spider Man career feels like it's ending. He aims to end the mission himself. So that's kind of like his drive. It's kind of in his steadfast character, it's what drives them um, to go through it. Now, this is interesting. So it says here he embraces the ongoing life continues, relationships can continue. He chooses to try again with MJ. That is actually more ending, like he's ending that whole thing as opposed to keeping it going. Because he's the steadfast character, um, and I will find ways to make this more apparent to the AI, but because he's the steadfast character, this is where he stays, essentially. That's how he grows into it. He might flirt with this, like keeping it going, but in the end, he finally goes back and ends all that issues. That's what makes him the steadfast character. Yeah, his biggest influence arrives as intuition. You won't know it's a leap of faith. That's the responsive hunch. Um, and yeah, his critical flaws experience. His jaded experience, burnt out, divorce, blunts his influence. So for the influence character, to keep them from being so overwhelmingly challenging, you would have some sort of critical flaw. And in this case, it's very funny because it's all his experiences that make him doubt and deflect and undercut his mentor role. Now, the relationship story, I actually think there's a handoff because I think it's both the mentorship there, but also father son, because I feel like that's a really strong relationship in the story through line. And you'll notice there are reflections of the father son dynamic where the issue between them is worry and there's issues of trust. And then test, like, watch this. Like, so I went through all that, right? And then it goes through and does all the story goal structure, and then even went through and did all the signpost. Oh, it got cut off because it was too long. So let's do this. Let's do before you finish that, I was thinking also that RS was father son thing between Miles and his dad. And I actually see more of that reflected in story form. Can you pull specific examples, illustrations, and go through the RS, their relationship? So in just the same way, all of these through lines are perspectives. So the objective story is they, main character is I, influence character is you, and relationship is we. And in the same way that you can hand off those perspectives to different players, different characters, like the influence character role, you can always hand off to different people, and they can be the different voices for that point of view. And the Christmas Carol is the best example where you have the four ghosts that reach out to Scrooge. You can do the same thing with relationships. So not only is there the mentorship relationship between Peter and Miles that we're seeing reflected here, it also gets handed off with the same sort of thematic material to the father son, right? I guess his name is Jeff. So fixed attitudes, they're very like opposing father son Jefferson, okay? The patrol car drop off. Oh, the forced say I love you. That's actually really funny. That is a mind because love specifically is a fixed attitude. It's in the subconscious. So his whole thing about I love you, that's a dynamic in the relationship that's being explored. Um, Their attention is driven by reflex. See, I feel like this is stronger actually than the one with Peter B. Parker. Peter B. Parker is definitely the influence character, and there is some relationship there, but I feel like this is even stronger. Their attention is driven by reflex. Jeff's impulsive, overprotective cop reactions and Miles' involuntary flinches. Jeff worries about Miles' future. Miles worries dad will never get him. And then trust is, yeah, definitely the core. And then, so then the relationship mends when they allow testing instead of suspicion. Jeff tests a new approach at the dorm door, speaks vulnerably and no commands. Oh, rad. Miles tests revealing himself indirectly, saving the city. Then the playful web handshake as Spider-Man. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's a test thing. Um, when confidence rises, the relationship accelerates. I see this spark in here. You don't have to be the best, just be yourself. That confidence supercharges Miles, and it's a very warming sensation, father son thing. Whereas external threats crowd out intimacy, crime scenes, Aaron's death, the collider chaos. Yeah. Jeff's cop posture, which is threat management, often blocks genuine connection until he lowers the shield at the door. It's brilliant. So yeah, that would take, us dramatic experts forever to fill this out. But you can lean on, this is where AI is like the most amazing thing in the world, because you just got a really comprehensive understanding of all the different narrative thematics, and all of these work. You can always find instances of it that work to this complete story form. And I feel like that is the very, very best way to learn Dramatica theory. So that will do it for today, perfectly at the 90-minute mark. If anybody has any questions about Dramatica theory that they want to leave down below in the comments, feel free to do that. The other great place to do that is here in the forums, here in the community. If you have any sort of question about either this specific episode or you want to do it on YouTube, that's totally fine. Make sure you like and subscribe or leave a comment down below. Everybody knows what to do by now. And I will see you again next week. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. Thanks for all the comments. And yeah, I would definitely say the very best way to learn Dramatica theory is to just pull up a Storyform and dive into it. Oh, the classes, I will leave all the details for that in the description once I get this all loaded up and stuff. And then I will see everybody next time. Thanks so much, everybody. And we'll talk really soon. Have a great night.